The last winter ferry carried Sawyer Merrick home to a mother who had been waiting far longer than he knew. At the harbor, an aging German shepherd slipped into the freezing water and recognized Sawyer by one forgotten command. But the deeper shock waited beyond the shoreline, where a steel fence divided the orchard his family had built. Sawyer believed coming home meant taking everything back, until his mother told him the truth he was not prepared to hear. Some losses are caused by betrayal, while others grow quietly from distance, pride, and the fear of becoming a burden. With Cobalt standing between anger and love, Sawyer had to decide whether protecting his family meant restoring the past or respecting their future. Stay with us to the end, then share what home and forgiveness mean to you. The last ferry to Brightwater Inlet left the mainland under a sky the color of brushed steel. Sawyer Merrick stood alone near the stern rail, where the wind was sharp enough to keep the other passengers inside. Snow lay in thin white seams along the deck. Beyond the wake, the coastal highway had already disappeared behind a low curtain of mist, taking the naval base, the medical offices, and the temporary quarters with it. He wore a clean blue digital camouflage uniform without insignia or name tape, covered by a dark navy parka. The old diving watch on his left wrist ticked beneath his glove, its scratched face catching the occasional flash of winter light. 47 years had taught Sawyer that leaving was usually easier than returning. Departures came with schedules, manifests, orders, and gates that closed at a known hour. A man packed what he required, checked his equipment twice, and stepped into whatever waited beyond the door. Returning offered no such mercy. There were no procedures for discovering whether the people one loved had learned to live better without him. He had completed his formal handover 3 days earlier. His shoulder had healed enough to pass ordinary assessments, though not enough to stop aching before storms. The Navy had given him an extended transition period and 2 paths to consider: return to an operational cycle after further evaluation, or accept a training assignment in Washington. Sawyer had signed neither document. He had placed both in the bottom of his travel bag, beneath 2 folded shirts and a length of worn dog leash he had carried for years without admitting why. His mother did not know he was on the ferry. Months earlier, he had written only that he might receive leave before winter ended. He had imagined appearing at the old house without warning, perhaps finding Agnes in the greenhouse with soil under her nails and Cobalt asleep across the doorway. The scene had comforted him during long nights away. It was also several years out of date. Brightwater Inlet emerged slowly from the haze. First came the black-green line of fir-covered hills, then the roofs of weathered houses, each carrying a quiet load of snow. The white lighthouse stood near the northern point, smaller than Sawyer remembered. Beyond it, the town climbed from the harbor in crooked streets, chimney smoke rising into the pale afternoon. He had not been home in almost 2 years. Before that, his visits had been brief, 4 days once, 9 days another time, small islands of domestic life surrounded by departures. He called when he could. He sent money every month. He watched short videos of Cobalt chasing fallen apples or sleeping at Agnes's feet. Sawyer had treated those fragments as proof that home remained unchanged. Now, as the ferry approached the harbor, he felt the uneasiness of a man about to test a bridge he had not inspected in years. The engines lowered into a deeper rumble. Passengers began gathering coats and bags. A crewman crossed the deck to check the mooring station. Sawyer looked toward the terminal, searching without allowing himself to call it searching. Then a scream rose from the dock. It cut through the engine noise with the naked force of terror. "Help him! Please, somebody help him!" Sawyer turned. The sound came from the small waiting pier beside the main ferry berth. Several people were clustered near the railing. One woman was kneeling at the edge, leaning dangerously over the dark water, while another person held her around the waist. Below them, something struck the frozen metal ladder. A dog. A German shepherd hung in the narrow waterway between the floating pier and the stone seawall. His front paws were hooked over one icy rung, claws scraping for purchase. The rest of his body was submerged. Each surge of water lifted him and then dragged him lower. The dog's head dipped beneath the surface. Sawyer was already moving. He reached the lower deck as a crewman shouted for passengers to stay back. A harbor employee on shore ran toward a storage cabinet. Someone else was speaking urgently into a phone. Two men had found a life ring but could not throw it into the narrow gap without tangling the line around the pilings. The people were not doing nothing. They simply did not have enough time. Sawyer caught the arm of a broad, weathered crewman near the loading gate. "Kill the thrust on this side." The man looked at Sawyer's uniform, then at his face. He was in his early 50s, with a heavy gray mustache and the steady stance of someone who had spent half his life on moving decks. "Already dropping it," he said. "Current will still push you under the float. Get me a secured line." The crewman did not waste breath asking whether Sawyer knew what he was doing. He unclipped a safety tether from the bulkhead and fastened it around Sawyer's torso. "Jonah Reed," he said, tightening the buckle. "So you know who to blame if this gets stupid." "Sawyer Merrick." Jonah glanced toward the water. "Merrick?" The name meant something to him, but the dog slipped again before either man could pursue it. The shepherd's paws lost the rung. For one instant, only his muzzle remained above water. Sawyer climbed over the low gate and dropped. The cold did not feel like water. It felt like impact. It closed around his chest, locked his muscles, and drove the air from his lungs. The tether snapped tight behind him as he surfaced beside the floating pier. The ferry's hull towered at his back, engines pulsing faintly through the water. The dog was 2 yards away, trying to climb the ladder again. Sawyer reached for the harness area behind the shoulders. The shepherd spun with the last of his strength, teeth flashing close to Sawyer's wrist. "Easy." The dog struck the ladder, panicked by the voice, the water, the hands coming toward him. Sawyer stopped fighting for control. That instinct, to seize, restrain, complete the action, had saved lives before. Here, it would only drown them both faster. He saw the animal clearly for the first time. Dark saddle markings spread unevenly across a copper-brown coat. Silver had begun to gather around the muzzle. The right ear stood rigid with fear. The tip of the left bent slightly outward. Something in Sawyer's chest shifted. Not certainty. Not yet. He reached again, slower, turning his left wrist toward the dog. Beneath the soaked parka cuff was the old watch, the wool glove, and the faint scent of the worn leather leash packed in his bag and handled that morning. The dog's eyes fixed on him, dark amber, older now, still waiting. Sawyer spoke the word he had not used in years. "Anchor." The shepherd went still. The change was so sudden that Sawyer nearly mistook it for exhaustion. Then the dog lifted his nose toward Sawyer's wrist and breathed in once. His ears shifted. The water rolled between them, black and bitter. Above, people shouted instructions. Jonah called Sawyer's name, but the voices seemed to move far away. The dog made a low sound in his throat. It was not a growl. Sawyer knew that sound. "Cobalt," he whispered. The shepherd released the ladder. For one terrible second, his weight dropped entirely into Sawyer's arms. Sawyer caught him beneath the chest and turned, placing his own body between Cobalt and the seawall. Cobalt did not struggle again. He pressed his wet muzzle against Sawyer's neck, trembling so violently that Sawyer felt it through both their bodies. Jonah and the harbor workers pulled on the tether. Sawyer guided Cobalt toward the ladder while a dockhand lowered a rescue sling. The first attempt slipped beneath the dog's hindquarters. The second held. "Lift him first," Sawyer shouted. Cobalt was raised awkwardly, paws striking metal, water streaming from his coat. Hands reached down and dragged him over the edge of the pier. Only when the dog was safe did Jonah haul Sawyer toward the ladder. By the time Sawyer climbed onto the dock, the cold had found every old injury in his body. His right shoulder burned, his fingers had lost feeling. Water ran from his uniform and pooled around his boots. He ignored all of it. Cobalt lay wrapped in 2 emergency blankets. His breathing came fast and shallow. A woman knelt beside him, both hands cradling his face. She wore a navy wool coat with gray patches sewn over the elbows. A cream scarf had come loose around her neck, revealing a small silver apple blossom brooch. Her white hair had escaped its low knot and clung damply to her cheeks. Sawyer saw the changes before he saw the woman. The thinner wrists, the bend in her shoulders, the red cracks across her hands, the cane lying forgotten near the railing. Then she looked up. Her eyes were the same, pale blue, sharp with fear, and furious at the world for having frightened her. "Sawyer?" His name broke in the middle. He had imagined this moment 100 different ways. In some versions, Agnes laughed. In others, she cried. Once, during a fever after surgery, he had imagined she opened the door and simply said he was late for supper. None of those versions contained freezing seawater, emergency blankets, or his mother looking as though hope had exhausted her. "Hi, Mom." Agnes rose too quickly. Ruth Calder, the woman who had been holding her back from the water, caught her elbow. Ruth was 63, square-shouldered and practical, wearing a red harbor jacket over thick gray coveralls. Her cropped silver hair was flattened beneath a wool cap, and the ring of terminal keys at her belt struck together as she moved. Agnes crossed the last step between them and slapped Sawyer's upper arm. It was not a hard blow. His wet uniform made it sound louder than it was. "You jumped into the harbor." Sawyer looked down at himself. "That appears to be what happened. You could have been killed. So could Cobalt. That does not improve your argument." Her mouth trembled after the words. Then she wrapped both arms around him. Sawyer had been embraced after missions. Men had clapped his shoulders. Medics had steadied him. Commanders had shaken his hand. None of it had prepared him for how light his mother felt. He held her carefully at first. Agnes tightened her grip as if carefulness were an insult. Behind them, Cobalt struggled out of the blankets. A dockhand tried to keep him down, but the dog pushed forward on shaking legs. He did not go directly to Agnes. Cobalt came to Sawyer and pressed his muzzle once against the center of his wet chest. The gesture was brief, almost formal, a confirmation. "You are here." Then Cobalt turned and leaned his full body against Agnes's legs. Sawyer saw his mother's hand settle automatically between the dog's ears. Cobalt looked up at her face, waited until she took one steady breath, and only then lowered his head. The habit was too practiced. Something cold remained inside Sawyer that had nothing to do with the harbor. Ruth picked up Agnes's cane and handed it to her. "You didn't tell me he was coming today," she said. "I didn't know." Ruth looked at Sawyer. "She's been here for 14 ferry days." Agnes gave her a warning glance. Ruth ignored it with the ease of long experience. "Not 14 days in a row," Ruth clarified. 14 arrivals. Every time the mainland ferry came in after that letter. Sawyer looked at his mother. Agnes adjusted the blanket around Cobalt. "I needed groceries." "The terminal does not sell groceries," Ruth said. "It sells coffee." "You hate their coffee." "I have learned patience in my old age." Ruth snorted. "You have learned to lie with better grammar." For the first time since entering the water, Sawyer nearly smiled. The expression did not survive. He pictured Agnes standing here on other afternoons, watching strangers step from the ferry. Cobalt beside her, snow collecting on the patched elbows of her coat, each trip home ending without him. He had imagined surprising her. He had never considered what she might endure while waiting for the surprise. Jonah approached with Sawyer's travel bag and parka, both recovered from the ferry. He studied Cobalt, then Agnes, then Sawyer. "I suppose the name makes sense now," he said. Sawyer accepted the bag. "Thank you." Jonah nodded toward the terminal office. "You both need heat, dog especially. Ruth has blankets in the truck. Ferry can survive 10 minutes without me pretending I run the ocean." Ruth led them toward the parking area. Her vehicle was an aging green station wagon with a cracked dashboard and a heater that produced more noise than warmth. Agnes sat in the passenger seat. Sawyer climbed into the back with Cobalt wrapped in blankets across the bench. As the car pulled away from the harbor, Brightwater passed outside the fogged windows in familiar pieces. The bait shop, the old church, the white lighthouse above the inlet. Cobalt rested his head on Sawyer's thigh. Sawyer placed one hand against the dog's ribs, counting the breaths without meaning to. Every few moments, Cobalt lifted his head and looked toward Agnes, not casually. He checked the position of her shoulders, the angle of her face, the movement of her hands. Only after confirming she was there did he settle again. Sawyer rubbed the folded tip of Cobalt's left ear. The dog closed his eyes but kept one paw braced against the seat, ready to rise. 2 years earlier, Cobalt had belonged to both of them. Now he carried himself like Agnes's guardian. Sawyer looked at his mother's reflection in the windshield. She sat very straight, one hand around the apple blossom brooch at her chest, pretending not to be tired. He had returned to Brightwater Inlet. The town was where he had left it. The harbor, the hills, the lighthouse, all of them had kept their appointed places. But somewhere between the last photograph and this winter afternoon, home had continued without his permission. And Sawyer began to understand that arriving was not the same thing as coming back. Brightwater Inlet looked almost offensively beautiful beneath the winter sun. Snow rested along the shop awnings in clean white lines. Wreaths hung from doors. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys as Ruth Calder's old station wagon climbed away from the harbor and followed the narrow road inland. Sawyer sat in the back beside Cobalt, one hand resting lightly against the dog's damp ribs. The heater coughed warm air through the vents with the determination of an old machine trying not to embarrass itself. Up front, Agnes had stopped shivering, though she still held her scarf closed at the throat. Ruth drove with both hands on the wheel and the stern concentration of someone who distrusted black ice, tourists, and men who gave directions from passenger seats. "Road past the cannery is worse than it looks," she said. "I remember," Sawyer replied. "No, you remember it before the county stopped pretending to maintain it." Agnes glanced back at him. "Ruth has been at war with the county since 1989. The county started it." The exchange was so familiar in shape that Sawyer nearly relaxed. Then the road curved past the old feed store, and he saw how many things had changed while still wearing the faces of what he remembered. The laundromat had become a pharmacy. The hardware store had expanded into the bakery next door. A cafe occupied the building where his father once bought engine oil and peppermint sticks in the same transaction. The white lighthouse remained above the inlet, but one of the fir trees beside it was gone. Sawyer found himself searching for absences. He disliked that instinct. In the field, noticing what was missing could save a life. At home, it turned every familiar view into an accusation. Cobalt raised his head as the station wagon left the town center and entered the quieter agricultural road east of the inlet. His body stiffened with recognition. He sniffed at the seam of the window and gave one soft breath through his nose. "You know where we're going," Sawyer said. Cobalt looked at him, then toward Agnes. The dog's loyalty had changed its center of gravity. Sawyer could feel it without resentment, though not without pain. Ruth slowed at a fork bordered by sleeping blackberry canes. The Merrick Road appeared beneath two leaning cedar posts. For half a second, Sawyer saw home as it had been. The long slope. The old orchard spreading behind the house. The greenhouse roof catching the winter light. The red tool shed near the irrigation ditch. His mother's kitchen window above the snow. Then the station wagon moved another 20 feet, and memory broke against steel. A fence ran across the orchard. It was too tall for livestock and too new for the land around it. Galvanized wire stretched between dark metal posts, cutting through rows of apple trees that had once belonged to one continuous pattern. A sliding gate blocked the old service road. Mounted at eye level was a white sign with green lettering, "Lorne Winter Produce Authorized Access Only." Sawyer leaned forward between the seats. "What is that?" Agnes's shoulders rose slightly beneath her coat. "Dexter uses part of the land now." "Part?" "It's an arrangement." Ruth said nothing, but her mouth tightened. The house stood on the near side of the fence, smaller than Sawyer remembered. Gray cedar shingles showed through where snow had slid from the roof. One porch post leaned outward. The gutter above the kitchen bowed in the middle. The front steps had been sanded, but not well. A narrow path had been cleared from the driveway to the door. Beside it, Cobalt's tracks formed overlapping circles around the house. Not random tracks. A route. The same path repeated so many times that the snow had hardened into a pale trench. Cobalt climbed out before Sawyer had fully opened the door. The dog moved stiffly at first, favoring his left hind leg, then walked the perimeter of the porch with his nose low. He paused at the eastern corner, looked toward the fence, and stood there until Agnes called him. "Inside, old man." Cobalt obeyed, but not before checking the gate once more. Sawyer carried the bags toward the house. At the steps, he noticed a green plastic pipe emerging from beneath the foundation, crossing the yard, and disappearing under the new fence. He remembered that line. It fed the greenhouse and the outdoor spigots from the orchard well. The front door stuck halfway. Agnes put her shoulder against it. Sawyer reached past her and lifted slightly on the handle. The swollen frame gave with a dry scrape. "I've been meaning to fix that," she said. "How long?" "It only acts up when it's cold." "Mom, this is Washington." She gave him a narrow look. "I am aware of the climate." The house smelled of wood smoke, dried apples, and the faint mineral scent of old plumbing. Inside, much remained unchanged. His father's coat hooks still lined the wall. The braided rug near the stove still curled at one edge. The ceramic rooster Agnes had always claimed to hate still stood on the kitchen shelf. But the rooms had grown thinner. There were fewer logs stacked near the stove. One lamp had no shade. A blanket covered the lower half of the kitchen window where cold air slipped through the frame. Sawyer opened a cabinet while looking for a towel. 2 cans of beans, half a loaf of bread, tea, a jar of preserves with only a spoonful left. He closed it before Agnes saw him looking. Cobalt shook water across the floor. Agnes pointed at the dog. "Do not pretend you have forgotten manners because of a dramatic afternoon." Cobalt sneezed. "That is not an apology." Sawyer found towels in the laundry cupboard. He dried Cobalt's coat while Agnes changed into an old green sweater and Ruth put water on to boil. The furnace clicked beneath the floor, started, then stopped. A few seconds later it tried again. Sawyer looked toward the vent. Agnes kept her back to him. "When was that serviced?" "It was looked at." "That wasn't my question." "It was looked at by a man with tools." Ruth set 3 mugs on the counter. "Dexter sent Toby over last winter." Agnes turned. "Ruth." "What? He did?" Sawyer straightened slowly. "Dexter Lorne?" The name belonged to an older memory. A broad boy from 2 grades ahead who could lift sacks of feed without bending his knees, and who once broke Sawyer's sled, then repaired it before anyone asked. "Yes," Agnes said. "He runs the greenhouse company now." "On our land?" "On leased land." The distinction came too quickly. Sawyer was about to press when Cobalt crossed the kitchen and stopped at the back door. A vehicle approached outside, not fast, not hesitant, the engine cut off near the fence. Through the window, Sawyer saw a dark green pickup polished clean despite the slush. A man stepped out wearing a fitted work coat the same muted green as the company sign. Dexter Lorne had grown heavier with age, though not soft. He was compact and broad through the torso, with swept gray-blonde hair and a clean-shaven face that seemed designed for local business photographs. His boots were expensive, his gloves spotless. He carried a slim document case. Agnes exhaled through her nose. "I told him I would call." "You called him?" "I called to say Cobalt fell into the harbor." Sawyer looked at her. "He checks on us," she said. The word "us" landed badly. Dexter knocked once and entered after Agnes answered, bringing cold air and the scent of cedar mulch with him. His eyes found Sawyer immediately. For an instant, surprise broke through the control in his expression. Then he smiled and extended one gloved hand. "Sawyer Merrick." Sawyer did not take it at once. Dexter lowered the hand without embarrassment. "I heard about the harbor," he said. "Half the town has by now." "Small town." "Still is, just more expensive." Cobalt stood beside Agnes, not growling, but positioned so his shoulder touched her knee. Dexter noticed. "How is he?" "Cold and exhausted," Agnes said. "But alive. Good dog." Dexter's tone carried familiarity. Cobalt did not move toward him. Sawyer looked at the document case. "You came to check on the dog with paperwork?" Dexter smiled faintly. "I came because Agnes said you were home, and I assumed the fence would raise questions." "It raised one." "Only one?" "Who gave you permission to put it there?" Agnes closed her eyes briefly. Dexter removed his gloves finger by finger and placed them on the table. On his right hand, a silver signet ring caught the kitchen light. "Your mother did." He opened the case. The documents were organized in transparent sleeves: a lease agreement, a loan schedule, a memorandum recorded with the county, several later amendments. Dexter laid them out without touching the teacups, as though the kitchen table had become a conference room by his decision alone. "The original arrangement covered the North Orchard," he said. 5 years of agricultural use, revenue credited against the loan." "What loan?" Agnes moved toward the stove. "Sawyer." "What loan?" Dexter answered instead. "Medical bills. heating repairs, property tax, veterinary care after Cobalt tore his leg. Cobalt's scarred front paw rested on the floor between them. Sawyer read the first page. Agnes's signature was there, shaky but recognizable. The later documents were denser. One expanded access to the greenhouse. Another granted management authority over the irrigation system. A third extended the term and altered the route of the service road. Sawyer traced a legal description with one finger. It referred to a split cedar marker near the eastern wash. That marker is gone. Dexter leaned back slightly. The description came from the existing survey. The eastern wash collapsed 15 years ago. The county accepted the filing. That doesn't make the geography return. Dexter's smile diminished. You've been home 40 minutes. Long enough to recognize my own orchard. Your mother's orchard. The correction was quiet, accurate. Sawyer felt Agnes watching him. Dexter capped his black fountain pen and aligned it with the edge of the papers, though he had not used it. I didn't take the land, he said. I put it back to work. The old greenhouse was failing. The well needed maintenance. Trees were going unpruned. Agnes needed help. I needed a temporary arrangement, Agnes said. Dexter turned toward her with practiced gentleness. And that is what we made. Sawyer looked at the term on the newest amendment. 15 years is temporary? In agriculture, yes. The answer was smooth enough to have been used before. Sawyer's gaze moved through the kitchen, the patched window, the weak furnace, the nearly empty cabinet. If the orchard is working, he said, why is this house falling apart? Agnes stiffened. Dexter's expression did not change, but something sharpened behind his pale brown-green eyes. Because land does not become profitable simply because someone misses it. Sawyer stared at him. Dexter continued, almost kindly. You've done well for yourself. Your mother is proud of you. But money wired from a distance does not shovel snow. It doesn't drive someone to the clinic when she can't breathe. Dexter, Agnes warned. He looked at Sawyer, not her. Some people send money home. Some people are here when a woman cannot stand. The room became very quiet. Sawyer felt the old diving watch beneath his sleeve. His thumb found the scratched edge of its bezel and turned it once. The accusation hurt because it did not need to be entirely false. Cobalt stepped closer until his flank touched Sawyer's leg. Not comfort. Positioning. Sawyer closed the file. You should leave. Dexter put on his gloves. I expected you to react poorly. You haven't seen poorly. Agnes struck the table with the flat of her hand. Both men looked at her. She stood between the stove and the documents, small in her faded green sweater, the apple blossom brooch pinned at her collar. This is my house, she said. Neither of you will use it to measure which man can make the greater threat. Dexter collected the papers. His expression warmed again by degrees. I'll leave copies, he said. You'll want time to read them. He handed the folder to Agnes, not Sawyer. At the door, Dexter paused. The lock on the service gate is new. Cobalt should be kept this side. There's equipment moving after dawn. Sawyer's eyes followed him. Is that advice? It is concern. For the dog? For everyone. Dexter left. The pickup reversed smoothly and disappeared beyond the trees. Sawyer waited until the engine faded. Then he walked to the mudroom, opened an old drawer, and found the heavy fencing pliers his father had used for wire repairs. Agnes followed him outside. The cold had deepened. Blue shadow filled the orchard while the last sunlight lay across the snow beyond the fence. Sawyer approached the locked gate. Do not, Agnes said. That fence is beyond the old north boundary. You do not know that yet. I know where I grew up. You know where you remember growing up. He set the jaws of the pliers around the chain. Cobalt moved between him and the gate. The dog did not bark. He simply stood broadside, head level, amber eyes fixed on Sawyer. Move, Sawyer said. Cobalt remained still. Anchor. One ear shifted, but the dog did not lower his body as he had in the harbor. The command was not enough. Sawyer realized why. At the dock, he had used it to save Cobalt. Here, he was using it to make the dog assist his anger. Cobalt knew the difference. Sawyer lowered the pliers. Agnes's voice softened, but not much. I did not wait all winter for you to come home and declare war before supper. Sawyer looked through the fence at the dark rows of apple trees. "This isn't right." "No," she said, "but it is mine to untangle." The answer cut deeper than Dexter's insult. That evening, Sawyer worked in the kitchen because work was safer than conversation. He tightened the cabinet hinge, replaced the weak bulb above the sink, cleaned the furnace intake, and found a filter gray with neglect. He sealed one draft beneath the window with folded cloth. Agnes made a thin stew with potatoes, onions, and a small piece of beef. They ate at the old table. Sawyer noticed she served herself less than half his portion. Before he could speak, Agnes lifted the final piece of meat from her bowl and placed it in Cobalt's dish. Cobalt sniffed it. He did not eat. Instead, he looked at Agnes, then at Sawyer. The furnace clicked, failed, and started again. Outside, the new fence cast narrow black lines across the snow. Sawyer rested both hands on the table. For once there was no tool in them, no order, no immediate solution. Only his mother, his dog, and a silence that had been built over years, one careful omission at a time. By morning, the storm had passed without becoming serious. Sunlight came through the kitchen window in a pale rectangle, revealing dust above the stove and scratches on the table Sawyer had forgotten were there. Agnes was already awake. She sat with a cup of tea between both hands, dressed in her mint-green sweater and charcoal skirt, her silver apple blossom brooch pinned neatly at the collar. Cobalt lay beside her chair. The piece of beef from the night before was still in his bowl. Sawyer noticed it before he noticed anything else. "You didn't eat," he said. Cobalt opened one amber eye. "He ate breakfast," Agnes replied. "He simply rejected my cooking. It was boiled beef. He has standards now. You came home, and immediately he became difficult." The humor almost softened the room. Almost. The folder Dexter had left sat at the far end of the table. Agnes had placed a folded dish towel over it, as though paper might become less dangerous if treated like something waiting to be washed. Sawyer removed the towel. "I know someone who can read this properly." Agnes stirred her tea without drinking. "You know someone who will tell you what you want to hear?" "No." "That would be a first." He let the remark pass. "Helena Frost practices property law, agricultural disputes, leases, water access." Agnes looked up then. "You contacted her already?" "I called this morning." "You did not ask me." "I asked whether she could review documents." "You called a lawyer about my land without asking me." Sawyer felt the familiar instinct to defend the efficiency of his decision. Instead, he looked at Cobalt. The dog remained beside Agnes, not accusing, merely located. "I should have asked," Sawyer said. Agnes waited, perhaps expecting the sentence to continue into an explanation that would cancel it. It did not. After a moment, she looked down at her tea. "When?" 10. "She still wears those sharp little glasses?" "I don't know." "You went to school with her for 11 years. "I was not studying her glasses." Agnes's mouth shifted. "That explains several things about your education." Helena Frost's office occupied the second floor above a marine insurance agency near the harbor. The building leaned slightly toward the street, as if decades of coastal wind had persuaded it to take a position. A brass plaque beside the stairs read, "Helena Frost Land, Water, and Rural Property Law." Inside, the office was warmer than the Merrick house and smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and wet wool. Shelves covered one wall from floor to ceiling. Rolled survey maps stood in a metal basket near the window. Helena rose from behind a broad wooden desk when they entered. At 51, she had the compact, efficient posture of someone who regarded unnecessary movement as a tax. Her dark hair, threaded with silver, was cut in a straight bob along her jaw. Thin rectangular glasses rested low on her nose, and a light brown birthmark near her right temple made her face more memorable than conventionally polished. She looked first at Agnes. "Mrs. Merrick." "Agnes." "Only if you call me Helena." Then she looked at Sawyer. "Merrick." "Frost." Agnes removed her gloves. "Good. You have both matured beautifully." Helena's expression barely changed, but amusement passed through her eyes. Cobalt entered last and inspected the office without haste. Helena did not reach for him. She allowed him to smell the edge of her coat, then returned her attention to Agnes. That small restraint earned more trust from Cobalt than enthusiasm would have. Helena placed the folder on her desk. "Before I read anything, I need to be clear about whom I represent." Sawyer leaned back slightly. Helena continued, "I represent Agnes if she chooses to retain me. Not the family collectively, not the property as an abstract idea, not you because you are louder." "I'm not loud." Agnes and Helena looked at him. Sawyer adjusted his chair. Helena turned to Agnes. "Do you want me to review these documents and advise you?" Agnes looked at the folder. For a few seconds, the only sound was the old radiator ticking behind the desk. "Yes," she said. "I want to know what I signed." "And what outcome do you want?" Agnes hesitated. "I want to know first." Helena nodded. "That is an outcome." Sawyer felt an unexpected resistance rise inside him. He had arrived ready to ask how quickly the fence could come down, how to stop Dexter, how to restore the property. Helena had begun somewhere else, with Agnes's decision. She opened the original lease and read in silence, marking passages with a silver mechanical pencil. She did not dramatize each discovery. She merely separated the documents into small piles. After 20 minutes, she spoke. "The first agreement appears ordinary, 5-year agricultural lease, North Orchard only. Dexter receives access to that section and credits a defined percentage of revenue toward a personal loan." "So that part is valid?" Sawyer asked. "Possibly. I have not verified signatures, payment records, or filing history." Agnes folded her hands tightly. Helena picked up the loan schedule. "The debt itself also appears real." Sawyer glanced at his mother. Agnes did not look at him. Helena moved to the amendments. "These are different." "How?" Agnes asked. "The first expands equipment access. The second gives Lorne Winter produce management authority over irrigation infrastructure. The third changes the term from 5 years to 15 and modifies the property description." Sawyer leaned forward. "That description uses the Eastern Wash." "I saw." "It no longer exists." Helena marked a line. "That does not automatically invalidate the document. Old descriptions often survive landscape changes. But if the reference point creates ambiguity, a licensed surveyor may need to establish what land the amendment actually covers." She lifted another page. "This fee schedule is more concerning." Agnes frowned. "What fee schedule?" Helena turned the paper toward her. "Administrative management, equipment depreciation, winter maintenance, emergency service charges." "I was never shown that page." "It carries your initials." Agnes stared at the lower corner. The initials were hers, or close enough. Sawyer watched the color leave her face. Helena did not rush to reassure her. "Do you remember initialing it?" "No." "That is not the same as proving you did not." Agnes looked at her sharply. Helena met the look without flinching. "I am not Dexter's lawyer, but if we build this case around what feels wrong instead of what can be established, we will lose." Sawyer disliked the sentence. That was one reason he believed it. Helena continued through the papers. A memorandum of lease had been filed with the county, publicly recording Dexter's claimed interest without including every limitation of the original agreement. "To anyone checking the record quickly," Helena explained, "this makes his control look broader and more settled than it may actually be." "He made the paperwork look stronger than the deal," Sawyer said. "Perhaps. Why do lawyers love that word?" "Because your preferred word is usually obviously, and obviously is expensive in court." Agnes gave a small, involuntary laugh. The sound startled all three of them. Cobalt lifted his head from beneath the window. For a moment, the office became less adversarial. Then Helena closed the folder. "I cannot promise you will recover every part of the land. If the original lease and loan are valid, you remain responsible for what you agreed to." Agnes nodded once. Sawyer did not. "And the amendments?" "They require investigation. Filing records, payment history, witness signatures, notarization, survey descriptions, and the circumstances under which Agnes signed." Sawyer looked at his mother. "What circumstances?" Agnes pulled on her gloves. "We can discuss that at home." The conversation ended there because Agnes chose for it to end. Sawyer found that harder to accept than Helena's legal uncertainty. On the drive back, Cobalt sat between them in Ruth's borrowed station wagon. Agnes watched the coastline. Sawyer watched her reflection in the side window. He could ask questions tactically, beginning with facts and tightening around inconsistencies. He had done that with frightened men, exhausted witnesses, and people trained to resist pressure. He could not do it to his mother. At home, Agnes removed her coat and went directly to the pantry. She began taking jars from the shelf. Sawyer stood in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Checking dates." "On preserves?" "They do not become immortal because I made them." She held one jar to the light, inspected the lid, then placed it aside. Sawyer recognized the maneuver. She was retreating into work just as he had retreated into repairs the night before. "Mom," Agnes reached for another jar. "Helena needs the circumstances." "She will have them." "When?" "When I decide how to tell her." "You can start with me." Agnes set the jar down more carefully than necessary. Sawyer waited. Cobalt entered the pantry and stopped near the door, leaving no easy path around him. Agnes noticed. "Traitor," she told the dog. Cobalt sat. She looked at Sawyer. "The first agreement was my idea." He had prepared himself for deception, coercion, forged signatures. Not that. Agnes walked back to the kitchen and sat at the table. Sawyer remained standing until she gestured impatiently at the opposite chair. "Sit down. You are too tall when you are angry." "I'm not angry." "You are shaped like anger." Sawyer sat. Agnes folded her hands. "The winter after your last visit, I developed pneumonia. It became worse before I admitted it. Ruth found me on the kitchen floor." Sawyer's jaw tightened. "I spent 9 days in the hospital. Insurance paid most of it, but not all. The furnace failed that same month. Property taxes increased. Then Cobalt tore his leg on the fence near the north orchard." Cobalt lay down beside her. Agnes rested one hand on his scarred foreleg. "The surgery cost more than I expected. Dexter offered a loan. He also offered to lease the north orchard because I could not prune it alone. You had money from me. I used it." "For what?" "For the hospital, medication, taxes, the furnace, the roof patch." "Cobalt." Sawyer heard accusation where none had been placed. "I would have sent more." "I know." "Then why didn't you ask?" Agnes looked tired now, not physically alone. Tired in a deeper place. "The first agreement seemed sensible. Dexter would use land I could not manage, and part of the revenue would reduce the debt." "And after that?" "After that, there were more papers." She described them slowly. Dexter had brought documents after she returned from the hospital. Some were presented as insurance renewals. Others concerned pipe access, equipment coverage, or continuation of payments. He marked where she should sign and explained each page quickly while she was exhausted. "Were you confused?" "Sometimes." "Did he know?" "He knew I was ill." "That is not what I asked." Agnes's eyes hardened. "Yes, he knew." Sawyer stood so abruptly the chair legs scraped the floor. Cobalt rose with him. "He came here while you were medicated, and I signed them. You didn't understand them. I said I signed them. He exploited you. And I trusted him." The distinction mattered to her. Sawyer could see that. She was not defending Dexter. She was refusing to let Sawyer erase her participation and turn her into someone without judgment, history, or responsibility. He paced once to the window and back. "You should have called me." Agnes laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When?" "Any time." "During the month you called from a place where I could hear aircraft every 30 seconds? You could have told me. Or the time the steel doors kept opening behind you and you said you had 5 minutes? I would have handled it." "That is exactly why I did not tell you." The words stopped him. Agnes leaned forward. "You would have found a way to send more money. You might have left your assignment. You would have made me into a problem with coordinates. You're my mother. I am also a person." The silence after that was different from the one at dinner. That silence had contained things unsaid. This one contained things finally spoken. Sawyer lowered himself into the chair again. "I sent money every month." Agnes's expression softened, which somehow made the next question worse. "I know you did. She looked toward the pantry. "What kind of jam do I like?" Sawyer frowned. "What?" "My favorite. Apple. I made apple jam for 30 years. That is not the same as liking it best." He searched his memory. Blackberry, plum, spiced pear. He remembered boxes shipped overseas, labels written in her hand. He remembered giving jars away because he could not carry them all. He could not remember which one she kept for herself. Agnes waited. Sawyer had no answer. A metallic hammering erupted beyond the fence. Cobalt shot to his feet. The dog's body lowered, ears pinned backward, and a tremor moved through his shoulders. He stared at the back door as the pneumatic tool struck again, hard, rapid blows from the greenhouse construction area. Agnes stood too quickly. "I'm here," she told him. Cobalt moved against her legs, but his eyes stayed on the door. Sawyer crossed the room and looked through the window. Beyond the fence, a worker drove a steel support into frozen ground. The noise repeated across the orchard. Cobalt flinched at every strike. "How long has he done that?" Sawyer asked. Agnes rested both hands on the dog's neck. "Construction started in autumn." "And Cobalt reacts like this every time?" "He settles." "That is not what I asked." Agnes looked down. Sawyer saw the truth in the way Cobalt pressed against her. The dog had spent months listening to the land change one metal blow at a time, while Agnes told herself they were both adjusting. Sawyer closed the curtain. The noise did not stop, but the room became smaller and safer. That night, he woke at the kitchen table with no memory of leaving the guest room. His right hand was clenched against his chest. Sweat cooled beneath the collar of his shirt. For several seconds, the kitchen belonged to another place. Dark corridors, salt air, a voice over a radio that had ended too suddenly. Sawyer fixed his eyes on the grain of the table. One line, then another. 4 counts in, 6 out. Cobalt appeared in the hallway. The dog walked toward him, then stopped. Sawyer waited for the familiar weight of the muzzle on his knee. Cobalt turned his head toward Agnes's closed bedroom door. Only after hearing movement inside, a cough, the creak of bed springs, did he settle in the middle of the hallway. From there, he could see both rooms. Sawyer watched him lower his head onto his paws. Cobalt had not chosen between them. He had built himself into a bridge. And Sawyer, sitting alone at the old kitchen table, understood that the dog had been holding this house together long before the ferry brought him home. Helena Frost did not believe in miracle documents. She believed in dates, signatures, coordinates, tax records, invoices, and the slow accumulation of facts too ordinary to attract attention until they were placed beside one another. "A bad case looks for one dramatic piece of proof," she told Sawyer. "A good case rebuilds the sequence." They stood in Agnes's kitchen beneath the weak yellow light above the table. The documents from Dexter's folder had been separated into stacks. Helena's red leather case sat open beside them, filled with notes, county forms, and copies of the original lease. Sawyer leaned against the counter, arms folded. "What sequence?" "When the land use changed, when the fence moved, when the loan increased, when each amendment appeared, when your mother was ill, when the county record changed." Agnes sat with Cobalt beside her chair, one hand resting between his ears. Helena turned toward her. "And we begin with what you remember." Agnes looked through the window toward the orchard. "Memory is not a survey." "No," Helena said, "but it tells us where to look." The next morning came bright and cold. Snow covered the orchard in long bands of white, interrupted by the dark vertical lines of apple trunks. The fence divided the land with brutal neatness, though the landscape itself resisted such simplicity. Roots crossed beneath it. Old irrigation pipes ignored it. Wind-blown leaves had gathered on both sides. Agnes wore her navy coat and carried her cane openly this time. Sawyer noticed but did not comment. Cobalt moved ahead of them, nose low, following paths hidden beneath the snow. He did not pull toward the locked gate or behave as if he were searching for anything. He simply walked through the geography of his own memory. The first place he stopped was beneath an old apple tree near the western edge of the house. Its trunk divided low into 2 heavy limbs. One had been cut years ago, leaving a broad scar in the bark. Sawyer looked up. "I slept here once." Agnes gave him a dry glance. You slept there many times, once by choice. You were 17 and had informed me that no civilized man could live under unreasonable household law. What law? You were expected to wash a frying pan. Sawyer looked at the tree again. He remembered waking before dawn with Cobalt's predecessor, an old mixed-breed dog named Mercy, curled against his boots. He remembered his father opening the back door and leaving a blanket on the porch without saying a word. The memory returned with embarrassing clarity. Cobalt sniffed the frozen ground and moved on. They followed him toward the old greenhouse. Its glass roof was visible beyond the fence, half obscured by newer plastic structures built beside it. The original cedar door faced the Merrick house, but the new fence now ran several feet in front of it. Agnes stopped. That gate was not there at first. Sawyer looked at her. The fence? No, the fence first ended beyond the north row. She pointed with her cane. Dexter said he needed room for equipment. Then the trucks began using the old service path. Later, he said the irrigation lines made the boundary impractical. Helena, walking behind them with a notebook, wrote without interrupting. "When did the fence reach the greenhouse?" she asked. Agnes frowned toward the snow. "After Cobalt hurt his leg." Cobalt had stopped near a metal post where one section of wire appeared newer than the rest. A faint diagonal scar was visible through the fur on his front right leg. Sawyer crouched near the post. The lower wire had been replaced. The fasteners were different from those used farther north. "This section was added later," he said. Helena looked at him. "You can say it looks different. Do not turn yourself into an expert witness. It is different hardware. Then a qualified person can confirm it." Sawyer stood. He was beginning to understand that Helena's discipline was not caution for its own sake. She refused to let their anger outrun what could be proven. Cobalt continued toward the eastern side of the property, where an access road cut through what had once been a row of pear trees. Tire ruts had frozen into the mud beneath the snow. Agnes stopped again. That road was narrower. "How much narrower?" Helena asked. "Wide enough for the old tractor, not those delivery trucks." Sawyer looked across the fence at the compacted gravel. The road now connected Dexter's two greenhouse sections, making the Merrick land a central passage rather than an isolated lease. Cobalt stood at the edge of the road and looked back at Agnes. She did not move for several seconds. Then she said, "The fence did not appear all at once." The words were quiet. Sawyer watched her face. Agnes had remembered the changes individually. A shifted post, a new lock, a widened road, a pipe moved under the snow. She had treated each one as a practical adjustment, small enough to tolerate. Standing there now, she saw them as a progression. "He moved it in pieces," she said. "Each time, there was a reason." Helena stopped writing. "What kind of reason?" "Equipment access, drainage, snow clearance, safety." Agnes looked toward the greenhouse. Always something that sounded temporary. That realization altered the morning. Until then, they had been walking through a damaged property. Afterward, they were walking through a timeline. Helena's next step took them to Walter Crow. Walter lived in a weather-beaten house above the inlet, surrounded by rusted survey stakes, overturned buckets, and enough stacked lumber to suggest either a long unfinished project or a private argument with disposal. He opened the door only halfway. At 68, Walter had a narrow frame, a rope-colored beard, and a wool cap pulled low over his forehead. His eyes were gray and suspicious, though not unfriendly. "I retired," he said before Helena finished introducing herself. "We are not asking you to perform a survey," she replied. "Good. My knees have resigned from uneven ground." Agnes stepped into view. Walter's expression changed. "Agnes Merrick." "Walter Crow. You still make that sour cherry jam?" "I stopped giving it to ungrateful men. I praised it every time. You said it could remove paint. That was praise." Cobalt moved past Sawyer and approached the porch slowly. Walter lowered one hand. The dog sniffed it, then rested his muzzle against Walter's knee. Walter looked down. "Well," he said, "that is unfair." Sawyer almost smiled. Walter allowed them inside. His dining room had become an archive by accident. Rolled plans occupied two chairs. County map books leaned against the wall. A drafting table stood beneath the window, its surface protected by a piece of old canvas. Walter listened while Helena explained the conflicting descriptions. When she mentioned the Eastern Wash, he rubbed 2 fingers through his beard. That reference was used in the original survey. "The wash collapsed," Sawyer said. "I know. I was standing 50 yards away when half the bank went down." Walter crossed the room and pulled open a flat drawer. He did not produce a forgotten map that solved everything. Instead, he found a faded index sheet covered in project numbers. "If I surveyed it, the final record went to the county," he said. "My copy may still exist somewhere, but this is what matters." He pointed to a code written beside the Merrick name. "File number, original boundary survey, then a correction after the landslide." Helena copied it. Walter hesitated. "Dexter buys half the greenhouse fittings in this county. He extends credit to people who cannot get it elsewhere." "I know," Helena said. "If this becomes a public fight, it will not stay between 2 properties." "No," she agreed. Walter looked at Agnes. "You asking me to choose sides?" Agnes shook her head. "I am asking you to tell us where the lines were." Walter looked down at Cobalt's head against his knee. After a long silence, he nodded. "That I can do." The file number led Helena to county records, and the county records led to Mary Ann Cole. Mary Ann arrived 2 days later in a white utility vehicle carrying tripods, receivers, and the quiet authority of someone accustomed to landowners arguing before she had unpacked her equipment. She was 46, with dark hair braided tightly down her back and a square, wind-reddened face. Her manner was neither warm nor cold. She spoke as if every word had already been checked for accuracy. "I establish measurements," she told Sawyer when he began explaining the history. "I do not establish motives." "Understood." "No, you do not. Most clients say they understand and then spend 3 hours asking whether the other party is a thief." Agnes liked her immediately. Mary Ann compared the recorded deed, Walter's file reference, the post-landslide correction, permit maps, surviving coordinates, and current fence placement. She returned twice to verify readings. The result was not ambiguous. The fence crossed beyond the disputed amendment line in several places. The old greenhouse and irrigation well were outside even Dexter's broadest recorded claim. The access road had expanded beyond the permitted agricultural corridor. "The aerial images help establish when the physical changes occurred," Mary Ann explained, spreading printouts across Agnes's table. "They do not define ownership. The registered survey and deed do that." Sawyer studied the images. In the first, the north fence ended near the old pear row. In the next, it reached the greenhouse. Later, the service road widened. The land had not been taken in one decisive act. It had been absorbed through adjustments. Helena added the medical records carefully. Dr. Naomi Sutter, Agnes's physician, provided dates from the winter of the pneumonia. She did not claim Agnes had been legally incompetent. She documented episodes of confusion related to infection, low oxygen, and medication, along with written instructions recommending that Agnes have a trusted person present for complex decisions during recovery. The most troubling amendment had been signed during that period. Then Helena called Evelyn Pike. Evelyn arrived at the office wearing a camel-colored coat and the expression of someone already angry at herself. She was 64, with softly curled gray hair and hands that shook slightly when she removed her gloves. The notarization on the amendment carried her name. "I did not witness Agnes sign this," she said. Helena placed the page in front of her. "Is that your seal?" "Yes." "Your signature?" Evelyn stared at it. "It looks like mine." Agnes sat very still. Evelyn explained that she had once notarized equipment documents at the Lorne office. During a family emergency, her journal and seal had remained there overnight in a locked drawer Dexter's staff could access. "I should never have left them," she said. "I told myself it was one night." Helena did not accuse her. "Did you record this notarization in your journal?" "No." The absence did not prove who had completed the page, but it gave the amendment a serious weakness. By the end of the week, the case had begun to take shape. Sawyer stood in the kitchen with survey copies, medical dates, and notarization notes spread before him. For the first time, he could imagine the fence coming down. "We can restore the original boundary," he said. "The greenhouse, the well. The road. Agnes sat near the window, Cobalt's head resting against her knee. No. Sawyer looked at her. No what? No to restoring everything. He thought she had misunderstood. The survey shows he went beyond the agreement. I know. Then we take it back. Agnes closed her eyes briefly. Sawyer, stop. The word did not contain anger. It contained exhaustion. She looked out at the orchard. Before Dexter brought the later papers, I was already thinking of selling. Sawyer said nothing. Not only the north rose, she continued. Most of it. The room seemed to tilt, though nothing moved. Why? Agnes's fingers tightened around the handle of her cane. Because I was tired. He waited for a more acceptable explanation. None came. I was tired of waking up in a house built for 3 people, she said. Tired of pruning trees your father planted. Tired of repairing rooms no one used. Tired of looking down the road every time a vehicle passed. Sawyer looked toward the dark hallway. Agnes continued quietly. I considered an apartment near town. 1 room. No irrigation lines. No roof to clear. No orchard asking me to remember who was missing. You never told me. I was ashamed. Of selling? Of wanting to leave. Cobalt lifted his head and looked at her. Agnes touched the silver along his muzzle. I thought keeping the land proved I had not lost my family. Then the land became the thing that kept reminding me I had. Sawyer looked down at the maps. Until that moment, he had believed the old boundary represented justice. Every recovered foot of soil had seemed like a correction. Now he saw another possibility. He had been trying to restore a place that existed most perfectly in his own absence. What do you want? He asked. Agnes looked at him carefully, as if testing whether the question was real. I do not know yet. Sawyer nodded. It was the hardest answer he had received because it gave him nothing to act upon. He gathered the maps, but did not fold them. Outside, evening light turned the snow pale blue. The fence still stood. The greenhouse still lay beyond it. Nothing had been restored, yet something fundamental had shifted. Sawyer no longer wanted to force the property back into the shape of his memory. He wanted Agnes to be able to choose its next shape for herself. The first sign was not the absence of water. It was the sound the kitchen faucet made before anything came out. A dry metallic cough rattled through the pipe, followed by a narrow stream that weakened to a thread. Agnes stood at the sink with both hands wrapped around a kettle, watching the water hesitate as though the house had forgotten how to provide it. Sawyer looked up from the furnace panel he had opened beneath the stairs. Turn it off. I need tea. You need pressure in the line. At my age, those may be the same thing. The faucet gave one last shudder and stopped. Beneath the floor, the heating pump clicked twice, attempted to engage, then fell silent. The system depended partly on the shared well line that crossed beneath the orchard. Without sufficient pressure, the pump could not circulate properly through the oldest section of the house. Cobalt rose from his place near the stove. He walked to the back door and looked toward the greenhouse. Agnes set the kettle down. It did this last winter. For how long? A few hours. Who fixed it? She did not answer quickly enough. Sawyer closed the furnace panel. Outside, the morning was clear and cruelly bright. Fresh snow reflected the sun into every window. The steel fence cast blue-gray lines across the yard. Sawyer followed the exposed pipe from the foundation towards the eastern corner. Near the fence, a smaller branch line split toward the old greenhouse. The valve box had been fitted with a new black cover. A brass padlock held it shut. There was no frost on the lock. It had been placed recently. Sawyer took out his phone and photographed the box, the pipe, the fence, and the position of the lock. Then he held the screen beside his diving watch and photographed the time. He called Helena. Do not touch it, she said before he finished describing the problem. I know. You sound like a man standing beside a tool. Sawyer glanced at the fencing pliers hanging inside the mudroom. I'm standing beside a pipe. That answer did not reassure me. Helena instructed him to document the drop in pressure, record the furnace failure, and contact the local utility contractor who had previously serviced the shared system. She would prepare an emergency request preserving Agnes's access to water and heat. Sawyer ended the call. Then he walked toward the gate. He knew this was precisely what Helena had told him not to do. He also knew that knowledge had never been especially effective against anger. Cobalt followed several paces behind. The commercial greenhouse complex was awake beyond the fence. Fans hummed inside long translucent structures. Forklifts carried stacked trays across the gravel yard. Workers in insulated coveralls moved beneath clouds of warm vapor escaping from open doors. The old Merrick greenhouse stood between two newer buildings like a small wooden boat trapped among cargo ships. Sawyer entered through the public service drive. No one stopped him at first. Toby Fenner saw him near the loading platform. Toby was 60, broad through the middle and thick in the forearms, with a gray-yellow mustache that seemed permanently dusted with soil. He wore faded green overalls beneath a dark blue insulated coat. A pruning shear with yellow handles hung from his belt. When he recognized Sawyer, his hand moved unconsciously toward the shears, not as a weapon, but as a nervous habit. "You shouldn't be back here," Toby said. "The valve feeding my mother's house is locked." Toby looked toward the eastern pump shed. "Pressure regulator's been acting up. The lock is new. I don't handle the locks." "Who does?" Toby rubbed his thumb across the worn handle of the shears. "Dexter." Sawyer studied him. "You knew the fence crossed the old greenhouse." Toby's eyes shifted toward the workers nearby. "I know where I'm told to put posts." "That isn't an answer." "It's the one I can afford." The sentence stopped Sawyer more effectively than a denial would have. Before he could respond, the greenhouse office door opened. Dexter stepped outside wearing his green technical vest over a gray turtleneck. No coat, despite the cold. Warm air followed him from the building, carrying the scent of damp soil and fertilizer. He did not appear surprised. "I assumed you would come over." Sawyer pointed toward the pump shed. "Open the valve." Dexter descended the steps slowly. "The line is under maintenance." It was locked. "To prevent unauthorized interference." "It supplies my mother's house." "It supplies several systems. The pressure issue is mechanical." "Then remove the lock and let an independent technician inspect it." Dexter glanced toward Toby. "You called someone?" Sawyer stepped closer. "I photographed everything." Dexter's expression remained composed, but his right hand turned the silver signet ring on his finger. "Of course you did." The workers nearby had begun to slow without openly watching. A forklift idled beside a stack of trays. Somewhere inside the greenhouse, a timer chimed. Dexter lowered his voice. "You have been home less than 2 weeks, Sawyer. In that time, you have brought in a lawyer, a surveyor, and half the county archives. You moved a fence and locked a water line. I kept a failing operation alive. This is not your operation." Dexter looked past him toward the old orchard. "That is where you and I disagree." He explained the business as if delivering a presentation. Lorne Winter Produce had borrowed heavily to expand winter cultivation. A regional grocery chain had offered a long-term supply agreement, but only if Dexter could guarantee volume, water stability, and a direct loading route between the eastern and western greenhouse blocks. The Merrick property sat between them. Without the well and service road, Dexter's operation would be forced to reduce production. Workers would lose hours. Some would lose jobs. The company's loan could default. "You want me to believe you took her land to save the town?" Sawyer asked. "I used underproductive land to preserve an employer. You manipulated a sick woman. I gave her money when no bank would, and then charged her for the privilege of needing it." Dexter's jaw tightened. For the first time, the easy, businesslike tone thinned. "You were not here." Sawyer's shoulders went still. Dexter noticed. He stepped closer, careful to remain just beyond reach. "You were not here when she could not drive herself to the clinic. You were not here when snow collapsed part of the greenhouse roof. You were not here when Cobalt tore his leg open and she sat on the floor with blood on her hands because she could not lift him into the car." Sawyer felt each image land. Dexter continued. "You sent money, useful, clean, admirable from a distance." Toby shifted near the platform. "Dexter," he said quietly. Dexter ignored him. "Do you know who shoveled the path to her door? Who found a furnace technician in the middle of a freeze? Who advanced the veterinary deposit?" Sawyer moved one step forward. Dexter did not retreat. "You turned help into ownership," Sawyer said. "I turned neglect into productivity." Sawyer's hand closed. The distance between them had become very small. He could strike Dexter once and end the conversation. His body already knew the angle, the balance, the exact amount of force required. The impulse arrived cleanly. That frightened him more than rage would have. Cobalt came between them. The dog did not bark. He pressed his shoulder hard against Sawyer's shin, then leaned with his full weight. His coat was warm through the fabric of Sawyer's trousers. His breathing was fast but steady. Sawyer looked down. Cobalt's amber eyes were not fixed on Dexter. They were fixed on him. The dog had stood between Sawyer and a locked gate. Now he stood between Sawyer and a choice that could not be undone. Sawyer opened his hand. A single blow would give Dexter what he needed. A violent soldier, an unstable son, a threat to workers and property. It could weaken Agnes's case and turn every uncomfortable truth Dexter had spoken into an excuse. Sawyer stepped back. Cobalt remained against his leg until the distance widened. Dexter's expression changed only slightly, but Sawyer saw disappointment beneath the control. He had wanted the blow. That knowledge cooled Sawyer more completely than the winter air. Sawyer took out his phone. "I'm calling Helena." Dexter gave a faint smile. "Do that. I am also requesting an independent inspection of the line. The valve is on leased property. The pipe serves a residence. We'll let a judge decide whose inconvenience matters." Sawyer turned away. Toby followed him several yards from the office. "Merrick." Sawyer stopped. Toby looked toward the other workers before speaking. "The fence did not always run where it does now." Sawyer waited. Toby's hand tightened around the yellow pruning shear. "I helped move 2 sections. Different winters." "Will you say that to Helena?" Toby's face hardened with shame. "My wife is in treatment. This job carries our insurance." Sawyer could have told him that truth mattered more than fear. Instead, he thought of Agnes hiding bills because she did not want to become another burden. "What did you personally see?" Sawyer asked. Posts moved. Service road widened. Orders came from Dexter. "Anything about the contracts?" "No." "Then don't say what you don't know." Toby looked surprised. Sawyer continued. "When you are ready, tell Helena only what you saw." He walked back toward the house with Cobalt beside him. The emergency filing moved faster than Sawyer expected and slower than he wanted. Helena submitted photographs, the service history, Agnes's affidavit, and a statement from the independent contractor confirming that the locked branch valve affected pressure to the residence and greenhouse. Dexter responded through counsel that the line was under necessary maintenance and that no one had intended to interrupt household service. For 2 days, temporary tanks supplied water to the house. Agnes treated the inconvenience as a personal insult. "I have survived hurricanes," she said while pouring water from a plastic container into the kettle. "Now I must bathe like an unsuccessful camper." "You never liked camping." "I liked knowing I could leave." On the 3rd afternoon, Lydia Lorne came to the house. She arrived alone in a small gray sedan and remained inside for nearly a minute before stepping out. At 61, Lydia was slender and slightly stooped from years spent over ledgers. Her steel gray hair was cut short at the nape. She wore a plum turtleneck beneath a brown-gray coat and carried a worn leather shoulder bag close to her body. Cobalt met her at the porch. His ears lifted. Then he walked forward and sniffed her hand. Lydia's face changed. "Hello, old friend," she whispered. Cobalt did not greet her with excitement, but neither did he block her path. Agnes opened the door. "You should come inside before courage freezes." Lydia entered. Sawyer remained near the stove while the 2 women sat at the kitchen table. Lydia removed a small cream-colored calculator and a square notebook from her bag. She did not open either immediately. "I kept the books for Dexter," she said. "Kept?" Sawyer asked. "Until last spring." Agnes poured tea. Lydia wrapped both hands around the cup without drinking. "The amount listed as principal on your second schedule is not the amount transferred to you." Agnes went still. "How different?" Lydia looked at Sawyer, then back at Agnes. "Enough to matter." She produced a copy of a bank transfer. The number was lower than the loan balance stated in Dexter's amendment. "There are fees added later," Lydia said. "Management, equipment, emergency services." Were they in the original agreement? Sawyer asked. Not all of them. Will you tell Helena? Lydia's fingers pressed into her palms. I cannot testify yet. Sawyer nearly answered sharply. Agnes spoke first. Why did you come? Lydia looked toward the window, where greenhouse roofs shone beyond the fence. Because Dexter says everything he did protected the company. Maybe some of it did, but the numbers kept changing. And you kept writing them down, Agnes said. Lydia flinched. Yes. Cobalt lay beside her chair, head on his paws. Lydia watched him. If the company fails, 32 people may lose work. One of them is Toby, Sawyer said. His wife's medication is covered through the plan. Others have mortgages. One man is caring for his brother. Agnes nodded slowly. Fear is rarely empty. Lydia looked at her. Agnes continued. Loyalty can begin as protecting your family, but if you hold it too long, it becomes standing guard outside the wrong door. Lydia lowered her eyes. She left the transfer copy with Agnes, but took the notebook home. It was not enough. It was more than they had possessed that morning. The temporary order came just before sunset. Helena read it aloud over the phone. Dexter could not lock or alter the shared water system. Neither side could move fencing, remove trees, change roads, or interfere with existing access. Agnes could enter the old greenhouse while the dispute continued. A formal independent survey would be recognized for the upcoming hearing. Sawyer looked through the kitchen window. Across the orchard, a worker removed the padlock from the valve box under the supervision of a county representative. Water moved through the pipes again. The furnace started beneath the floor and continued running. Agnes stood near the sink, listening to the faucet fill the kettle in one clear, uninterrupted stream. She did not celebrate. Neither did Sawyer. The fence remained in place. Dexter still held the original lease. Lydia had not agreed to testify. Toby had offered only a private statement he might later withdraw. But for the first time since Sawyer came home, the decisions on the land did not belong entirely to the man on the other side of the wire. Cobalt drank from his bowl, lifted his head, and looked at both of them. Then he returned to the stove and lay down. The house was warm. For that evening, it was enough. The county courthouse had been built from pale stone that seemed determined to outlast every argument brought inside it. Snow covered the steps and gathered in the grooves of the carved columns. By 8 in the morning, the entrance hall was already wet with boot prints. Farmers, clerks, attorneys, and people waiting for traffic hearings stood beneath the high ceiling, carrying folders as though paper could keep their lives from spilling apart. Sawyer disliked courthouses immediately. The security line moved too slowly. The hallways offered too many blind corners. Every door opened without revealing what waited behind it. He wore his blue digital camouflage uniform beneath the dark navy parka, stripped of name tape and unit insignia. Helena had suggested civilian clothes. Agnes had disagreed. He should not dress like somebody else because Dexter's lawyer may find the truth inconvenient, she had said. Now Sawyer wondered whether she had been right. People noticed the uniform. Some recognized him from the harbor rescue. Others looked at him long enough to construct their own version of why a Navy SEAL had appeared in a rural property hearing. Cobalt was not permitted inside the courtroom. Ruth Calder had agreed to wait with him in the station wagon, parked where Agnes could see them from the courthouse windows during breaks. Cobalt had objected. He had planted all 4 feet at the bottom of the courthouse steps and refused to move until Agnes removed one glove, placed her palm against his cheek, and said, "Guard Ruth. She has poor judgment around vending machines." Ruth had replied that the dog deserved a more serious assignment. Cobalt went with her anyway, looking back at Agnes until the glass doors closed. The hearing room was smaller than Sawyer expected. There was no jury. No gallery full of spectators. Only rows of wooden benches, 2 counsel tables, a court clerk, and Judge Marin Bell seated above them. Judge Bell was in her late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and a calm, unsmiling face. She read while others spoke, which made it difficult to know whether she had heard them. Then she would look up and ask a question precise enough to prove she had missed nothing. Dexter sat beside his attorney. He wore a charcoal suit rather than his greenhouse clothes. The silver signet ring remained on his right hand. He turned it once while reviewing a document, then seemed to remember the room contained people who understood nervous habits and stopped. His attorney, Daniel Price, was a lean man near 60, with iron-gray hair and a voice built for sounding reasonable while delivering an insult. Helena placed her red leather case on the table and opened it. "You will not respond to him," she told Sawyer. "I know. You believe knowing and obeying are distant relatives." Sawyer looked toward Agnes. She wore her navy wool coat over the mint-green sweater, the apple blossom brooch pinned at her collar. Her cane rested against the table. She seemed smaller in the courtroom than she did at home, but not weaker. "What if he lies about me?" Sawyer asked. Helena arranged her notes. "This hearing is not about whether you were a good son. That will not stop him. No, your silence will." Sawyer's jaw tightened. Helena met his eyes. "If you defend yourself every time he redirects attention, you will help him make this case about you." The clerk called the matter. Judge Bell began by clarifying the limited purpose of the hearing. She would not decide final ownership, fraud, damages, or criminal responsibility. The questions before the court were narrower: whether Agnes should retain access to water and the old greenhouse, whether either party could alter the property while the dispute continued, and whether the evidence justified further proceedings concerning the scope of Dexter's rights. The limits steadied Sawyer. A narrow mission should have been easier. It was not. Daniel Price stood first. He did not accuse Agnes of lying. He described her as confused by a complicated but voluntary business arrangement. He did not call Sawyer violent. He described him as a highly trained military man who had returned after a long absence and immediately confronted workers, hired investigators, and challenged agreements his mother had honored for years. "Mr. Merrick's concern is understandable," Price said, "but concern does not rewrite a contract." Sawyer felt every word aimed at the benches behind him. Price continued. "Mrs. Merrick accepted substantial financial assistance when she needed it. She authorized agricultural use of the land. Lorne Winter Produce invested equipment, labor, infrastructure, and capital in reliance upon those agreements. Only after her son returned did these arrangements suddenly become coercive." Sawyer turned slightly toward Helena. She did not look at him. Price glanced at Sawyer's uniform. "No one questions Mr. Merrick's service, but military urgency is not a substitute for civil process." Sawyer's hand closed beneath the table. Helena placed 2 fingers on the edge of her legal pad, not touching him, not comforting him. A signal: remain where you are. Sawyer looked past the opposing table toward the window. Ruth's station wagon was visible below, its roof carrying a thin layer of snow. Cobalt sat upright in the back seat. Even from that distance, the dog appeared to be watching the building. Sawyer opened his hand. Helena's presentation began with the least dramatic evidence: the original lease. She acknowledged that Agnes had signed it. She acknowledged the personal loan. She acknowledged Dexter had performed agricultural work and provided services. Price seemed pleased. Then Helena separated the original agreement from everything that followed. "The dispute is not whether an agreement existed," she said. "The dispute is whether that agreement was expanded beyond informed consent and beyond even the language of the later amendments." Mary Ann Cole testified first. She brought no theatrical maps mounted on boards. She used clean survey diagrams, registered descriptions, field measurements, and permit records. Under Helena's questioning, Mary Ann explained that the original lease covered the North Orchard. The disputed amendments used broader language, but even the broadest reasonable interpretation did not include the old greenhouse, the primary well enclosure, or portions of the widened access road. "How far does the current fence exceed that interpretation?" Helena asked. Mary Ann did not look at Dexter. "At several points, the encroachment ranges from approximately 40 feet to more than 200 feet. The cumulative area is just under 3 acres. Price objected to the word encroachment. Judge Bell instructed Mary Ann to use area beyond the described boundary until final rights were determined. Mary Ann corrected herself without embarrassment. Walter Crowe followed. He explained the history of the original survey and the correction filed after the eastern wash collapsed. He did not claim to establish the present boundary. That belonged to Mary Ann. His purpose was simpler: to show that the old geographic reference in Dexter's amendment had already been formally replaced in county records. Price attempted to portray Walter as an old friend helping Agnes. Walter scratched his rope-colored beard. "I have known Agnes 40 years. So your sympathies lie with her?" "My sympathies lie with anyone who reads the corrected survey before putting up a fence." A sound moved through the room before Judge Bell silenced it with a look. Dr. Naomi Sutter's testimony was careful enough to frustrate both sides. She described Agnes's pneumonia, low oxygen, medication, and documented periods of confusion. She also stated that Agnes had not been declared legally incompetent. Price seized on that answer. "So Mrs. Merrick retained the legal capacity to make decisions?" "I was not asked to perform a legal capacity evaluation." "But you cannot testify she lacked capacity." "No." Price turned toward the judge as though the matter were settled. Naomi continued before he could sit. "I can testify that she was medically vulnerable, intermittently confused, and specifically advised to have a trusted person present when reviewing complicated documents during her recovery." Price's smile faded. Evelyn Pike confirmed that the notarization bore her seal and resembled her signature, but no corresponding entry existed in her journal. She had not witnessed Agnes sign the amendment. "Are you accusing Mr. Lorne of using your seal?" Price asked. "No." "Then you do not know who completed the notarization?" "No." "What you know is that you failed to secure your materials." Evelyn's hands trembled on the witness rail. "Yes." The admission hung there. She did not excuse herself. That made it more credible. Toby Fenner entered the courtroom after lunch. He had replaced his overalls with a brown jacket and collared shirt, but the yellow-handled pruning shears were absent from his belt, leaving his hand with nowhere familiar to go. He testified only to what he had seen. The fence had been moved in more than one stage. He had helped relocate posts after being told the changes reflected updated access rights. Part of the service road had been widened before the revised construction permit was approved. "Did Mr. Lorne tell you to steal land?" Price asked. "No." "Did you read the Merrick contracts?" "No." "Do you know the legal boundary?" "No." Toby swallowed. "I know where the fence used to be." The sentence was small. It remained in the room after he stepped down. Then Agnes was called. Sawyer had expected Helena to guide her gently. She did not. "Did you borrow money from Dexter Lorne?" "Yes." "Did you voluntarily lease part of your orchard to his company?" "Yes." "Did you need the money?" "Yes." "Did you hide some of your financial problems from your son?" Agnes looked toward Sawyer. "Yes." The word reached him without defense. "Did you sign documents without reading every page?" "Yes." "Did you once consider selling most of the property?" "Yes." Price shifted at his table. The honesty was dismantling the simpler version of Agnes he had prepared to defeat. Helena placed the original lease before her. "What did you agree to?" 5 years of agricultural use in the North Orchard. Part of the revenue would reduce the loan. "Did you agree to 15 years? "No." "Did you agree to surrender control of the primary well?" "No." "The old greenhouse?" "No." "Unlimited management fees?" "No." "Did you authorize the fence to be moved across nearly 3 additional acres?" "No." Price rose for cross-examination. He approached with the patient expression of a man offering someone a chance to correct herself. "Mrs. Merrick, your memory has not always been reliable, has it?" "My memory has been inconvenient. That is not the same thing." He paused. "You testified that you were confused after leaving the hospital." "At times." "You also continued paying bills, caring for your dog, and living independently." "With difficulty." "You signed the amendments." "I signed pages Dexter brought me." "And now, after your son returned, you regret those decisions." "I regret some of them." Price looked toward Sawyer. "Your son wants the property restored." "My son wants many things." A faint smile touched Judge Bell's mouth and disappeared. Price pressed on. "Has Mr. Merrick pressured you to challenge the agreements?" Agnes considered the question. "Yes." Sawyer looked at her. Helena remained still. Price's confidence returned. "In what way?" "He arrived believing he could repair my life as if it were a broken hinge." A few heads turned toward Sawyer. He called a lawyer before asking me. He wanted to cut the lock. He wanted every tree and every foot of soil put back the way he remembered. Price spread his hands. Then his pressure influenced this case. Agnes looked directly at him. No. His pressure forced me to tell him to stop. The room changed. I am here because I chose to be, she continued. I am not asking the court to pretend I never borrowed money. I am not asking anyone to erase my poor judgment. I am asking that my poor judgment not be used as permission for someone else to make it larger. Price's hands lowered. Agnes leaned slightly on her cane. I agreed to help Dexter use part of the land. I did not agree to disappear from it. Sawyer felt the words settle somewhere below anger. Agnes had not protected him. She had not blamed him entirely. She had told the truth in a form that spared no one, including herself. Lydia was the final witness of the afternoon. She entered carrying her worn shoulder bag and cream-colored calculator. At first, she confirmed only the bank transfer already provided. Agnes had received less principal than the later schedule stated. Price attempted to isolate the discrepancy as bookkeeping error. Then Dexter instructed him in a low voice. Price turned back to Lydia. Were you responsible for maintaining these accounts? Yes. For entering fees? Yes. For preparing revised balances? Sometimes. Then any errors may have originated with you. Lydia looked at Dexter. He did not return her gaze. Something in her posture straightened. No, she said. Price frowned. No what? No, they did not originate with me. She opened her square notebook. The courtroom became quiet. Lydia explained that Dexter had instructed her to add management fees not listed in the original lease. Equipment expenses had been allocated twice, once to company operations and again to Agnes's debt account. The loan principal in the amendment included costs never transferred to Agnes. Did Mr. Lorne know Agnes was recovering from illness? Helena asked. Yes. Did he seek independent counsel for her before expanding the agreement? No. Dexter finally looked at his sister. The calm in his face remained, but only as a surface. Lydia's voice shook. She continued anyway. Judge Bell did not rule on fraud. She did not void every document or award damages. Her order was narrower and therefore more believable. Agnes's access to household water in the old greenhouse would continue. Neither party could move fencing, alter roads, remove trees, modify irrigation, or transfer disputed interests while the case proceeded. The registered survey and Mary Ann's full report would be entered for further review. Accounting experts would determine the actual loan balance, legitimate investment costs, and disputed charges. Judge Bell also found that Agnes had presented a substantial question concerning the scope and execution of the later amendments. It was not victory. It was permission for the truth to continue. Outside the courthouse, sunlight passed through falling snow so fine it looked like ash made clean. Dexter descended the steps ahead of them. No officers waited. No cameras crowded him. He was not publicly ruined. He paused beside his vehicle and looked back at Lydia. For the first time, the confidence around him seemed less like armor than something holding a fracture together. Helena told Agnes that copies of the notarization and accounting records would be referred to the county prosecutor and the state unit handling suspected financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. They will decide whether further investigation is appropriate, she said. Agnes nodded. Sawyer looked toward Ruth's station wagon. Cobalt was standing with his front paws against the rear window. When Agnes approached, he barked once, his first bark since the harbor, and Ruth opened the door before he attempted to redesign the upholstery. Cobalt moved directly to Agnes, circled her once, then leaned against her legs. Sawyer waited until she was steady. "When the court allows it," he said, looking toward the distant orchard. "Do you want me to take down the fence?" Agnes watched Cobalt nose snow from the toe of her boot. "Not yet." Sawyer did not argue. She looked up at him. "We should not remove a fence until we know what we are keeping on each side." Snow collected in Sawyer's short brown-gray hair. He nodded. The old impulse to restore everything had not disappeared. It had simply lost the right to command him. Together, they walked toward the car, leaving 2 sets of footprints and 1 uneven line of paw prints across the courthouse snow. By the time the dispute ended, winter had nearly finished with Brightwater Inlet. The snow remained in the shaded places, beneath the firs, along the north side of the house, and in the narrow trenches where Cobalt had once patrolled the fence. Elsewhere, the ground had begun to show through in dark, damp patches. The settlement arrived without ceremony. There was no final confrontation in a crowded courtroom, no public confession from Dexter, no moment when every wrong could be named, punished, and put away. There were only meetings. Appraisers measured improvements. Accountants compared invoices against bank transfers. Attorneys argued over depreciation, interest, labor, and the difference between an investment made in good faith and an expense used twice. The process lasted months. Sawyer discovered that justice often resembled a room full of tired people correcting numbers no one had wanted examined. The conclusions were less dramatic than revenge and more useful. The original 5-year lease was valid. Agnes remained responsible for the money she had actually received. Dexter was entitled to credit for certain verified improvements he had made to the North Orchard. The later extensions were set aside. The unexplained management fees were removed. Duplicate equipment costs were rejected. The fence was confirmed to have crossed beyond the permitted boundary, and the old greenhouse, primary well, and widened service road returned to Agnes's control. The excess amounts Dexter had collected were applied toward the legitimate balance, repairs to the water system, and part of Agnes's legal expenses. Faced with a continuing civil case and the possibility of deeper review by the county prosecutor and the state unit investigating financial exploitation, Dexter agreed to terminate the remaining lease early. He did not apologize. Agnes had not expected him to. On the morning the papers were signed, Dexter stood at one end of Helena Frost's conference table while Agnes sat at the other. He wore his charcoal coat and silver signet ring. The black fountain pen rested in front of him, aligned precisely with the final agreement. For several minutes, he did not touch it. "You could have destroyed the company," he said to Agnes. She looked at him over her folded hands. "You nearly destroyed my right to decide. I kept the land productive. You kept making the decision larger." Dexter turned the ring once. "What happens to the workers now?" Agnes answered without triumph. "That depends on what we build next." Dexter signed. His hand remained steady. Only after he left did Sawyer notice the fountain pen lying on the table. Dexter returned for it several minutes later. By then, Helena had placed it beside the door. No one spoke when he collected it. His departure did not feel like victory. It felt like a door closing on a room that would remain damaged even after everyone stopped entering it. Sawyer expected Agnes to ask when the fence could be removed. Instead, she asked Helena for another meeting. 2 weeks later, Maeve Harlan arrived at the Merrick house carrying rolled maps and a canvas bag filled with more documents than seemed possible. Maeve was 59, tall and spare, with silver-brown hair braided loosely over one shoulder. She wore a forest green coat and mud-stained boots that suggested she trusted land more than offices. She represented the Salish Winterland Conservancy, a regional organization that helped protect small farms from commercial subdivision while allowing elderly owners to remain in their homes. Maeve did not begin by praising the orchard. She began with limitations. "A conservation agreement will reduce what the land can be sold for," she explained. "You would keep the residents and defined private acreage. Development rights on the remaining land would be restricted permanently." "Permanently is a large word," Agnes said. "It is supposed to be." "Would I still own it?" "Depending on the structure you choose, yes, but you could not later sell it to a developer for warehouses or housing lots." Sawyer studied the map. "And agricultural use?" "We can lease it through a local cooperative. Transparent terms, independent accounting, renewable periods, no private control over the house or well." Agnes rested her cane against the table. "What happens when I die?" The question made Sawyer look up. Maeve did not soften her voice or rush past it. "The residents can pass according to your estate plan. The conservation restrictions remain. The land cannot be broken apart simply because the next owner needs money." Agnes nodded slowly. "That may be the first sensible use of permanence I have heard." They did not decide that day. Agnes asked questions for weeks. She wanted to know who maintained the road, who paid taxes, who insured the greenhouse, and whether the cooperative could remove old trees without permission. Sawyer attended the meetings but stopped answering before she could. It was a small discipline. No one applauded him for it. The final arrangement allowed Agnes to retain the house, the old greenhouse, the well, and 6 acres of orchard around them. The remaining land entered a conservation agreement and was leased to a local agricultural cooperative. The cooperative hired Toby Fenner as greenhouse manager. When Sawyer heard the news, he found Toby replacing a damaged vent panel on the old greenhouse. Toby still wore his faded overalls and carried the yellow-handled pruning shears at his belt. "I did not expect them to keep me," Toby admitted. "You know the systems." "I also kept quiet too long." Sawyer looked toward the workers unloading trays. "Both can be true." Toby nodded. His wife's treatment remained covered under the cooperative's insurance plan. Several other employees from Lorne Winter Produce were also hired, though not all. The outcome did not save everyone. That mattered. A victory that pretended no innocent person suffered would have been another kind of lie. Lydia came twice each week to review the cooperative's books. She worked at a small desk in the packing room using her old cream-colored calculator despite the new accounting software installed beside it. Every entry required 2 signatures. Every fee was described in plain language. Agnes did not forgive Lydia in a single conversation. She did not punish her forever either. One afternoon, Lydia found a jar of sour cherry jam beside her calculator. There was no note. She carried it home. The old greenhouse reopened slowly. Agnes claimed 1 corner for winter herbs, 2 rows of small fruit trees, and a work table beneath the western windows. She no longer lifted heavy soil bags or climbed ladders. When the paths froze, she used her cane and accepted Toby's arm without pretending she had merely wanted to inspect his sleeve. 3 mornings a week, she taught cooperative members how to prepare preserves without turning fruit into sweet paste. She was particularly severe about blackberry jam. Sawyer learned that it was her favorite. He wrote it down once, then felt foolish and kept the paper anyway. His application for a training assignment remained unanswered through most of spring. He had submitted it without telling Agnes at first, not because he wanted to surprise her, but because he feared naming the choice would make rejection feel larger. The position would place him at a naval training facility within driving distance of Brightwater. He would instruct younger personnel in maritime operations, decision-making under stress, and the restraint required when force was available but unwise. Years earlier, he would have heard the word instructor as a polite name for no longer being needed. Now he understood that survival created obligations beyond returning to danger. The approval arrived on a rainy morning. Sawyer read the message twice in the greenhouse while Agnes trimmed rosemary. "Well?" she asked. It was approved. She did not cry or embrace him. She clipped another stem. "Good. That is all? I am trying not to frighten you with enthusiasm." He looked at her. Agnes placed the shears down. "I am glad," she said, "but you are still allowed to leave the house." "I know, and I am still allowed to make decisions while you are gone." "I know." She studied him. "You are becoming irritatingly teachable." Cobalt, asleep beneath the work table, thumped his tail once. By the end of the season, the dog no longer slept outside Agnes's bedroom. For several weeks after Sawyer returned, Cobalt had chosen the hallway, positioning himself where he could watch both doors. Later, he began spending part of the night near the stove. Eventually, Sawyer woke one morning and found Cobalt asleep in the kitchen, paws twitching in a dream, unconcerned with who might leave before dawn. Sawyer stood there for a long time. The change was so small that no one else would have named it healing. He did not name it either. He filled the dog's water bowl and began the coffee. The following winter arrived quietly. Snow returned to the orchard, covering the new boundary markers and softening the scars where the steel fence had once stood. The fence had not been removed entirely. Sections remained around equipment areas and cooperative fields, but they followed the surveyed lines and used wooden gates instead of locked industrial panels. The orchard looked different. Several old trees had died. One greenhouse had been dismantled. The widened road remained, though its use was now recorded and shared. The house still leaned slightly into the wind. Agnes refused to repair the ceramic rooster. On a bright morning in February, Sawyer loaded boxes into Ruth Calder's station wagon. Inside were jars of blackberry jam, dried apple rings, herb bundles, and several apple pies Agnes insisted were intended for sale rather than personal inspection. They were traveling across the inlet for a winter market. At the ferry terminal, Cobalt walked between Sawyer and Agnes. His muzzle had grown whiter over the year, and the stiffness in his left hind leg lasted longer on cold mornings, but his pace remained determined. Near the waiting pier, he stopped. The metal ladder descended into dark water beside the seawall. Sawyer shortened the leash without thinking. Cobalt stared at the ladder. He did not tremble. He simply stood there, nose lifted toward the salt air. Agnes watched him. "He remembers," she said. Sawyer looked at the worn rung where the dog's paws had once fought for purchase. "So do I." Cobalt turned away from the water. A box on Ruth's luggage cart had shifted open, releasing the smell of warm apple pie. The old shepherd's ears rose. He moved toward it with unexpected speed, pulling Sawyer 2 steps forward. Agnes laughed. "A Navy SEAL defeated by a retired dog and pastry. He has tactical motivation. He has no shame. That can be useful." The ferry horn sounded. Sawyer adjusted the boxes while Agnes took Cobalt's leash. Together, they walked towards the boarding ramp. Behind them, Brightwater Inlet shone beneath the winter sun. The orchard lay beyond the roofs and snow-covered road, no longer shaped exactly as Sawyer remembered it. Some trees were gone. The house still needed work. Its boundaries now represented compromise rather than inheritance alone. The place had not returned to what it had been. Neither had they. Sawyer would still leave for work. Agnes would still conceal small aches until someone noticed. Cobalt would still put himself between them whenever their voices rose. But leaving no longer meant abandonment. Returning no longer required the past to remain untouched. The 3 of them boarded the ferry as the ramp lifted from the dock. This time, no one was waiting alone on the shore. Sometimes doing what is right does not mean taking back everything that was lost. It means telling the truth, accepting our own mistakes, and refusing to let fear make our choices for us. Agnes did not need someone to rebuild her past. She needed the freedom to choose her future. And Sawyer learned that love is not proven by taking control, but by standing beside someone while they decide their own path. In daily life, we may not face courtrooms or disputed land, but we all encounter moments when loyalty, pride, and fear pull us in different directions. May God give us the courage to choose what is honest, even when it costs us something. Please share in the comments what this story meant to you, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, grace, and second chances. May peace find its way into your home,